and welcome to the Debrief, Carolina Journal's weekly wrap-up of everything we see here happening in public policy and politics in North Carolina. We're going to bring it to you each week, all the stories that we've been covering. If you like what you see, please like and subscribe it, and we'll bring it right to you every single week. I'm Donna King. I'm editor-in-chief of the Carolina Journal. Joining me this week for expert insight and analysis, of course, we have Alex Baltzegar, who is our political reporter covering the General Assembly, and Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation. Also joining us this week, David Bass, our key reporter there covering everything that we've got in politics and policy and, of course, education, and Brooke Medina from the John Locke Foundation. Thank you all. I really appreciate your help. This week we're going to be covering a lot, so let's jump right in. Okay, Governor Roy Cooper has launched a real pressure campaign this week. This is following his veto of the abortion restrictions legislation. He is now looking at possibly a veto override, but he is trying to make that stop. He's trying to prevent it. He's scheduled a rally for this weekend in Raleigh to try and drum up support. Alex, you've been covering this a lot. What's happening, and why is he going out into the state to talk about this?
So Cooper is worried because this abortion bill has already passed. In the House, it had a veto-proof majority that voted for it already. There were 2 absences, so we'll see what happens with those 2. And then on the Senate side, it was veto-proof, except that Senator Todd Johnson was absent, but he's definitely a yes for the override vote. And so I think the problem here is that Cooper feels like he is sort of screwed with this legislation.
Yeah, I mean,
he doesn't feel like there's a good path to get what he wants with this bill. And so what he's doing is he's picked out 4 Republicans who are a little bit more moderate, and they're in swing districts. And so he feels like he can go to their own districts. He can target them. He can rally some opposition to these members. The only problem is I've heard today, actually, that he has not called any of these members.
Really?
Personally.
So he's not reaching out to them.
He just goes to their district.
Just their constituents.
Yep, that's right.
Very interesting. So he also took to national airwaves to talk about this. He was on Face the Nation on Sunday making the case. I thought it was interesting. Now, this is an edited clip. It is Face the Nation. So we're just bringing to you just a little portion of it. But the anchor there on Face the Nation really took him to task on some of these things. Here's what they had to say.
Why would they respond to your public calling out? Why do you think that would matter to them?
Well, they don't have to answer to me. They have to answer to their constituents. So what I'm doing is trying to educate the public about the disaster that this bill is. And I'm going to go into their districts. I'm going to go into their districts this week. We're going to have forums with doctors and advocates and women who care deeply about the restrictions in this legislation. And we're going to educate the public. We're not going to let them disguise this thing as something reasonable when it's not.
Well, I mean, compared to some of your surrounding states, 12 weeks is more permissive.
If it were 12 weeks, Margaret, but it's not. It's not a 12-week ban.
You don't have the votes, though, to codify abortion access in the state of North Carolina. Why have Democrats...
No, we do not.
No. And so why have Democrats been so outmaneuvered on this issue? I mean, this just seems to be that even if you get rid of this bill, you're going to have this fight again and again and again. So where is the compromise?
We have gerrymandered districts, so we have a Republican majority. Thank goodness I'm a Democratic governor, so I can rally the troops. For 4 years, I have kept abortion legislation from becoming law that Republicans had passed. But in this election cycle, we lost. They gained a supermajority by 1 vote in each chamber. So now we're in a different position. We've held the line for 4 years.
Why would they respond to your public calling out? Why?
Very interesting. All right, little Freudian slip there. He said we lost some seats, but then he quickly said, no, they gained a supermajority. Mitch, tell me about this. This is all messaging. He really didn't address her question of where's the compromise.
No, he didn't. And to me, this whole piece from the governor getting out there and making his campaign spells that, as Alex said, they basically lost on this, but they can't admit that they've lost. So until the final vote is taken and the veto is overridden, they're going to fight this because they're national overlords of Planned Parenthood or whoever they're answering to on this are telling them you've got to fight any abortion legislation. Had they really wanted to work with Republicans on this, I'm sure Republicans would have worked with them. They could have said, look, we know you're going to change the number of weeks. We don't like that. but at least don't do these other things that we don't like. You know, we're not going to vote for your bill, but we'll put up less of a fight if you do some of these other things that we really would like you to do that would make this a little more palatable. They didn't. They've basically been fighting this tooth and nail. As Alex suggested, this campaign to swing the votes of Republicans is only swinging the votes of the people he already has on his side. It's not swinging any of these Republicans. And I think Roy Cooper is frustrated by the fact that he has been using pressure campaigns like this for years on his own party. And it works because people look at him as being very powerful as a leader within the Democratic Party. It doesn't work on the other party, especially when you spend all of your time criticizing that party, saying it's illegitimate, gerrymandered districts. Why would you expect that any of those people are going to work with you?
Right. So, you know, and David Bass, one of the things he said a lot in this effort to try and drum up support is that Republicans rammed it through with no public comment and, you know, no expert testimony. You and I watched this. There was 2 hours of just committee alone, plus another, 4 hours on the floor. Do you think people are buying that argument?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, it's interesting to see though the kind of what's going on Twitter with this, because there's all this talk about like, oh, it's an abortion ban, it's extreme, it's radical, it's all these sorts of things. And I think it's interesting the map that they put up even on Face the Nation, where they're talking about a lot of the other southern states. I mean, North Carolina is still going to be a little bit of an outlier in the southeast, even with the 12-week ban. So for it to be portrayed as something radical when a lot of other states have done a complete ban or a heartbeat bill or things like that, it's politics, and it's drumming up support for their base and that sort of thing. I would say really quickly, one of those 4 Republicans that is getting pressure now from Cooper is Tricia Cotham, who recently switched to become a Republican. I think it's interesting that they're continuing the same kind of pressure campaign that she was facing before as a Democrat. And I would just ask, how did that work out for you? She switched parties. So it's interesting just to see that whole
It really
dynamic
is.
develop.
So Alex, what's happening now this weekend? They're having a veto rally, I think, and he's trying to drum up some support for that.
That's right. So that's been what all of this pressure campaign has been leading up to, and it's been getting a lot of Raleigh media attention, I'd say. But Governor Cooper is going to be doing like a veto ceremony. Usually you do a ceremony to be signing a bill into law. This time he's going to be doing a veto ceremony, and it really is just all for show.
Sure. And now from a comms perspective, of course, Brooke, you know that some of these things, they're doing it on Mother's Day weekend, and, you know, some of these things could really work against them. There's even a viral video clip of him leaving a very poorly attended meeting here. How important is the social media attention for this?
Certainly, that's driving the narrative, that's driving public perception. I mean, whether we like it or not, that is how people form their general sense of what the likelihood is of something passing or failing, is this perception. And in comms and in PR, perception's reality, and it does not look like Team Cooper is capturing that in a way that is going to lend to success for them. Like you said, Mother's Day weekend of all weekends, to spend time advocating for abortion restriction expansion. That's a bad optical look, any way you slice it. But then beyond that, one of the events that he held was attended by about 6 different people. I mean, and so just like the lack of interest, it seems to me that it's an opportunity for his team to really read the room, and they're not doing that very well.
Very interesting. So, what are you thinking about whether you can see this override happening?
I doubt it will materialize, or the veto standing. The override will happen. I'm near certain. I mean, in politics, especially North Carolina, no one should ever, say that something is a definite until it actually happens. But in all likelihood, it seems like this pressure campaign is not going to work this go around.
Very interesting.
Before you switch gears, one other thing that's interesting. You referenced the fact that one of the media narratives has been that this has been rammed through, and it took a very short period of time. People who are fans of the old Rush Limbaugh radio show will remember one of his regular features was he would play 6, 7, sometimes 10 sound bites in a row of media people saying the exact same thing on different networks. We saw that play out on that exact angle on this story this week, where a few days after the votes were finalized and the bill was sent to Cooper, various media outlets reported the same story. Oh, this bill was rammed through. And I personally got a call from a fairly cub reporter at one of the local TV stations saying, I was on a different story, but they've switched me to this thing about the procedure on the abortion bill and how it was very quick. So obviously there has been a talking point from someone on the political left that, hey, media outlets, you should cover how quickly this bill was rammed through, just like we used to hear the national media do on the story of the day.
Yeah,
That's
it's
right.
very interesting.
And not only was it deliberated for months and months and talked about during the campaign cycle, but they also had 2 hours of public testimony.
Sure.
And it was the longest Senate debate on the floor in maybe a decade, I think Berger
Wow.
said. Something around there.
Well, you won't see this here at Carolina Journal. Of course, you like and subscribe to the Debrief every week, and you won't see that sort of turnkey messaging here with Carolina Journal, of course. So we're going to switch gears. I'm actually going to come right back to you, Brooke. The NCGOP made a huge announcement this week about their upcoming convention in June. What did they have to say?
Yeah, this was a huge get for the North Carolina GOP because not only was there Trump that they announced, which is huge, he will be speaking on Saturday next month in June, but they also secured Pence and DeSantis.
Wow.
This is big. Like, just from a perspective of if you're running this convention, you're very excited. You're probably looking at a sold out convention.
Right.
This is there is a candidate for just about everyone within the Republican and unaffiliated base that leans Republican by this. But what I think is particularly interesting on this front is DeSantis will be speaking on Friday evening, Pence on Saturday afternoon, and then Trump on Saturday evening. But I think it's interesting because polling right now among likely Republican voters for the primaries, Trump is well ahead of any other potential candidate at 55%. Right. However, when you pair up Trump, Pence, and DeSantis against Biden, as of the latest polling, DeSantis is the only one that's leading against Biden. And so this shows this definite bifurcation between the Republican primary voter versus maybe the general election voter.
Oh, that is really interesting. It's something the party has to really be thinking about right now, right, David?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, and North Carolina, of course, is going to play an important role in this whole process. I do think it's interesting that even among the Republican electorate, there was a poll that came out a few months ago that had DeSantis leading by a sizable portion, and now we have this other poll that shows Trump leading. So there's this pull between those two really powerful factors here. So it'll be interesting to see where it ends up.
Sure, Mitch, we're really talking about something of a battle for the soul of the Republican Party. Democrats have gone through this. That the Trump voter is an active voter. They show up, they donate money. The question is, can DeSantis pull them too? Where do you think North Carolina falls in that way?
It's going to be very interesting to see, and I think we're seeing this play out on the state level as well with our marquee matchup, which is going to be the governor's race. I think you've got the Mark Robinson voters who are very much for Mark Robinson, and there are a number of Republicans who are concerned that Mark Robinson can easily win a primary, but could he win a general election? It's the same argument you're hearing about Donald Trump. Donald Trump is popular among Republican primary voters. If you look at this latest poll and other polls that we've seen in other states, he far outpaces DeSantis or any other candidate, but a lot of people are saying, can he win a general election, which is going to be the key. Winning your nomination but not winning the general election is still losing. And so I think that's going to be a major question for Republican voters in North Carolina in the coming months. Is Donald Trump the person who not only can win a nomination, but can also win a general election, or are you going to stick the United States with Joe Biden for another 4 years?
Well, wouldn't it be crazy if DeSantis actually declared while he was in North Carolina? It shows you how important North Carolina is, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, Alex, what are you hearing from lawmakers down at the General Assembly? Is there a Team Trump, Team DeSantis, Team Pence group?
Honestly, no.
Really?
I don't think that these lawmakers at the state level are that into the national scene,
interesting.
honestly. I think a lot more of them care a lot more about state issues and state leaders, and so they're probably more interested in what's going on in the governor's race.
Sure. I mean, that is a critical, they're all going to be on that same ballot. So the question is, whoever those candidates are at the top, it's going to pull all the way through, right?
Right, and I'm sure they are looking at that because I think especially in a suburban district, for example, we've seen that Trump does not help Republicans in suburban districts.
Okay.
And so I think some of those people like John Bradford down in Mecklenburg, potentially even Tricia Cotham, Aaron Perret, some of these members may be looking at the top of the ticket to see what could happen.
Right, of course.
But a brief note that goes back to our first topic, that is the pressure campaign that Cooper has on these legislators and their districts. Remember, these aren't their districts. They're going to be in new districts because they're going to be drawn again. And you know that Republican legislators are going to try to draw districts that are as favorable as possible to these other people. John Bradford, one of the people being pressured, he's not even running for the House again. He's going to run for treasurer. So what does he care if Cooper's out there in his district complaining about Bradford?
Very interesting. All right, let's go right back actually to that. The North Carolina's State Board of Elections has a new governing board here this week, just sworn in a new chairman. Mitch, fill us in on what's been going on over there at the State Board of Elections. They've got a huge year coming up.
They certainly do. They're going to be preparing for the 2024 election, which of course is another major election, presidential year, always a big deal. There's a 5-member Board of Elections by law, 3 members from the governor's party, 2 members from the other major party. So now with Governor Roy Cooper, that means 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans. As of this week, 3 new members of that board, 2 new Democrats and 1 new Republican. Damon Circosta, Stella Anderson, Democrats, and Tommy Tucker, Republican, leaving the board. Alan Hirsch, a former top advisor to former Governor Mike Easley, is the new chairman. He was added to the board. Also, Siobhan Millen is a new Democratic member. And then forget his name now, the new Republican member who is a lawyer in Nash County.
Right.
So I'm sure that
Eggers.
Eggers is still there,
Yeah,
and then there's
Eggers
the new
there,
member who I'm sure Roy Cooper knows from his days being a Nash County lawyer. So basically, you have the new board. They're going to be working alongside Karen Brinson Bell, who got another 2-year appointment as the executive director in dealing with all of these election issues coming forward.
Sure, there are a lot of them. One of the things I know you're going to be tracking down at the General Assembly are some of these voting integrity bills that are going through. Of course, there were some big Supreme Court decisions that reversed decisions on felon voting and voter ID. This has to be something that the legislature is talking about.
That's right. They're excited for some election reforms.
Sure.
I think with the voter ID decision coming out, that had been a very long battle since they were able to put it on the ballot in 2018. The voters of North Carolina endorsed it.
Sure.
They passed a law to get it into law, and then the Democratic Supreme Court at the time did not allow it. So I think they're very excited about certain election reforms. There's some stuff going on with the Zuck Bucks, as they would say.
Now tell us again what Zuck Bucks are.
So Zuck Bucks are public money.
Okay. Or
Private
donation.
money.
Private money
Right.
that is fed into public institutions that run elections.
And the key concern about it has been that the Zuck Bucks coming from Mark Zuckerberg and his outfit have gone to counties that tend to vote Democratic rather than being evenly distributed.
That's right. It's almost a turnout campaign for Democrats.
Of course. And Brooke, tell me what your thoughts are about this. The State Board of Elections controls so much, but we don't really hear that much about it. In 2024, we're going to be hearing a lot more.
Yes, indeed. I mean, the scrutiny after COVID and during the 2020 elections is certainly amplifying just the role that state-level Board of Elections play in democracy and what the outcomes are. And when you think about this from this perspective of just the importance of election integrity, but also people having confidence in their elections, like this is monumental that they are as transparent as possible, that they also account for unaffiliated voters, which is the largest voting bloc here in North Carolina. I believe unaffiliated voters now account for 35% of our registered electorate. And so that's critical, and even right now there is a suit going through the system that is some unaffiliated voters are calling for representation on the State Board of Elections. I think that's fascinating as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Now you have an update on that though, Mitch, right? Those unaffiliated voters and the lawsuit?
Yes, the latest development is that Governor Cooper filed a brief with federal court asking the judge in the case to throw the suit out. And part of what's interesting about this is that that mirrors the same argument made 2 months ago by legislative leaders. The lawsuit is Common Cause and several unaffiliated voters who have gone to court saying that the current law that says that the 5 members of the Board of Elections have to be from the 2 major parties discriminates against them as unaffiliated voters. They would like to be able to serve on the State Board of Elections. State law prevents them from doing that. And so they've gone to court to get the law struck down. Back in March, legislative leaders filed a brief saying, please throw this sued out because they don't have standing, their rights are not being violated. The brief that came out from Governor Cooper, which was actually written by lawyers from Attorney General Josh Stein's Justice Department, says the same thing. Throw this suit out. They don't have any standing. We might remember that a few years ago, there actually was briefly an unaffiliated member of the State Board of Elections right after Roy Cooper was elected and the General Assembly tried to change the Board of Elections. They first made it a 4-4 evenly split board. Courts threw that out, so they said, okay, well, let's have a board of 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, and 1 unaffiliated voter to give some balance.
Sure.
And the courts threw that out too. So the reason that we have a 3-2 Democratic board is because the General Assembly gave up and said, okay, you don't like what we're trying to do to make this bipartisan, we'll just go back to the old system.
Sure.
And that is what is in place right now.
Very interesting. So all of this is really laying the groundwork for the 2024 election. David Bass, give us an update. So we have more and more people declaring for some of these big offices, seems like every day.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's 2024 is just around the corner.
Right.
We're already in the horse race for it. So, yeah, in the gubernatorial race on the Republican side, of course, Robinson has already declared.
Right.
Dale Falwell, state treasurer, has also declared for that primary. And then pretty soon here, likely going to have Mark Walker,
Okay.
Former congressman, declaring as well. So you'll have 3 on the Republican side. Meanwhile, on the Democrat side, you have 1 in current Attorney General Josh Stein.
Sure.
I think one interesting dynamic of this race is that I've been following North Carolina politics since the early 2000s.
Right.
So not that long, but longer
Sure.
than some folks.
Sure.
So I remember the last 3 Democrat governors. It's been Mike Easley, Bev Perdue, and then
Right.
Roy Cooper. They've all kind of been from the East. They're not from the Raleigh or Charlotte area.
Right.
So Josh Stein would be kind of the first Democrat candidate for governor who's more of a metro city guy. Maybe doesn't have as much appeal as like a Roy Cooper would in some of the more rural areas. So it's going to be interesting if he is the nominee to see how that plays, particularly against someone like Robinson, who has a working class background, kind of those kind of roots. To see a Democrat in that position and a Republican, that could be a very interesting.
Yeah, that
race.
is really interesting. Now, you've also been following, of course, education for a really long time, and Tamika Kelly has endorsed Stein, but Cooper hasn't. What do you think that means for people who are interested in school choice?
That is a very interesting dynamic there. I think that it really shows that the NCAE has lost a lot of its clout in
Right.
state politics. I think, as we talked about before on the show, I mean, there's a rising tide of parents wanting educational options,
Right.
school choice. It's not the way it was even 5 years ago before the pandemic. The pandemic's changed a lot. So I think that's an example, really stark example of how the NCAA's kind of political clout has declined.
Brooke, what races are you watching going into 2024? I know they're just gearing up, but there's a lot of big ones.
Yeah, definitely the governor's race.
Sure.
I think on the Republican side in particular, as this field becomes increasingly crowded, what does that look like? What are the implications for policy going forward in 2024? As well as, of course, do the Republicans maintain those supermajorities at this next election at the state legislature? Right now, it seems like they've got the ability to really push forward a lot of their agenda. And time sometimes is of the essence because you don't know, is there going to be a sort of pushback wave depending on how the abortion stuff lands, how the transgender stuff, the culture war issues.
Sure.
I think North Carolina's economy is strong, and so many North Carolina voters, I don't think will want to disrupt the status quo, but to the degree that the culture war really drives the conversations, particularly in the Republican gubernatorial primary,
Right.
I think that's going to really that's going to give us some insight into what 2024 will actually look like.
Sure, absolutely. So, Mitch, tell me what all of this means, particularly when we come down to North Carolina voters. We have a fairly high turnout, but lots of unaffiliated. So we're going to roll through the primaries. We don't know exactly what we're going to end up with. What do you think we're going to see here in 2024?
Well, it'll be interesting, and it may be dependent in a large extent on what happens at the national level, because
Okay.
that can drive how people vote up and down the ballot. If you look at the last 2 election cycles, we've basically been about a 52-48 Republican state. If you look at sort of those generic races where no one really knows who the candidates are, that's where Republicans have won 52-48. If that's true, that bodes well for them in 2024. But it also depends on who's at the top of the ticket. If people see Donald Trump at the top of the ticket and they just can't stomach him as a candidate again, that will hurt Republicans down the ballot. Same thing could be true of Mark Robinson. A lot of people on the Republican side really love Mark Robinson, but there are a lot of people who look at him and say, I'm not sure that he can win a general election, and he might cost Republicans down the ballot. That could happen. You asked a little bit earlier what races are we watching. I think another one that would be important to watch is Attorney General. With Josh Stein running for the governor's seat, that means it's an open race. Republicans haven't had an Attorney General probably since Reconstruction era, if even then. And we know the Attorney General could play a very important role in determining what federal government policies to support or oppose. We know that Josh Stein opposed a lot of Trump policies, hasn't said boo about any bad Biden administration policies. A Republican Attorney General could help counteract things that a Democratic administration does in D.C., assuming we have one. Also, a Republican Attorney General could look into corruption in local government, which is something we haven't seen the state Justice Department do much of over the years. So I think that's an important one to watch.
That is, and some members of the legislature, where you're covering every day, have decided to leave the legislature and run for some of these Council of State offices. Which ones are you watching?
That's right. So one former legislator, Tom Murray, has declared for the Attorney General's race. We'll see who else. Yep, he's a Republican. We'll see who else jumps in there. I've
Dan
heard
Bishop
rumors.
is looking into it.
Yep, Congressman Dan Bishop, also a former state legislator, is thinking about it. Rumors suggest. And then for the state treasurer's office, Representative John Bradford, who's a Republican from Mecklenburg County, has announced for that one. It seems like the state legislature is a good path up to the Council of State in North Carolina.
And labor. There's a couple of members for labor.
Representative John Hardister from Guilford County is running. He's declared for labor commissioner because our current labor commissioner, also former state legislator, Josh Dobson, has stepped aside, and then Ben Moss, who I believe is from Moore County, has also declared for that race. We'll
be watching those really carefully. I want to bring up our tweet of the week before we leave. This is a fascinating one. Mitch brought it to my attention. There was what they call a push poll. You've probably seen this on Twitter, where you say, okay, what do you think about this issue? People click yes or no. Tell us what you saw.
Yeah, this was interesting. This is a left-of-center education activist named Chris Nordstrom. Anyone who knows him knows he is well known as being very vitriolic in terms of being against school choice. And so he puts up this Twitter poll with the very objective question, should the state use taxpayer dollars to subsidize the education of the rich, or something of that sort? And despite the fact that he wrote the question for people to say no, what ended up happening was a vast majority of people said yes.
80%,
that it's fine to use state tax dollars to subsidize rich families with kids in school.
I noticed that had like 66,000 views or something like that.
And it certainly got national attention because Corey DeAngelis, who is a major school choice advocate across the country, was one of the people who pointed this out.
Interesting.
And other groups have given Mr. Nordstrom some grief over his poorly designed and poorly executed poll.
Ouch. Okay. Yeah, for sure. I had to squeeze that in here before we wrap up. Also, as we go today or tonight on Thursday, Title 42 is getting ready to expire at midnight. Our thoughts are with some of these Marines from Camp Lejeune who are headed down to the southern border to help. As we are recording this to bring it to you, there are about thousands, tens of thousands of people trying to get into the country illegally right now at the southern border. The policy there, the Biden administration has implementing a policy that takes effect on Friday that says if you came all the way to the United States through other countries, without declaring or without requesting asylum from those other countries, you can't request it here. I'm not quite sure how that policy is being implemented, but certainly we're going to be watching this over the next few days to see how it unfolds and what's going on, and praying for safety for those soldiers, those Border Patrol agents down there trying to secure our southern border. So, like and subscribe to The Debrief. We're going to be bringing you more information every single week. This wrap-up is going to be coming to you every Thursday night, and we're looking forward to hearing from you and letting me know what you think. And also follow CarolinaJournal.com for the latest and all the news, everything that's happening in policy and politics in North Carolina. Have a great day.